Big shout out to Spencer, Jonathan, and David for being new patrons this week. I always say that I couldn't make the show the way I do without you, and this week's episode is a special illustration of that. If you like hearing things done in person, up close and personal, and you want to help me do more of that, check out patreon.com/thegaytheist manifesto and consider a pledge to support the show. Every bit helps. Thanks. Love you, friends. I'm Callie Wright, and this is the Gaytheist Manifesto. When I was a kid, classic rock was the thing in my house. In the house, in the car, it was everywhere. At the beginning of every song, I'd test my mom. Who plays this one? And she always knew. She always knew. I was super impressed by that. When I was around 7 or 8, my mom met the guy who'd eventually become my stepdad, and he was a country guy. There was a pretty immediate shift in the music that was played in the car and around my house. From there, it was mainstream country only. I was a little weary at first. My mom and I had a connection over classic rock. I don't even know that I particularly loved the songs, but they were my mom and I's thing. It was a thing we had. And it just sort of went away all of a sudden. But also, Garth Brooks is the shit, so I bought him. I went along with it, and as I got older, I got into metal and eventually emo and hardcore and indie stuff, and I just stopped listening to country. And I also sort of started to pick up on the stereotypes about the music and the people who listen to it. And so I still don't exactly remember how I ran across it, but I found an article on the website Bandcamp, which is a spot for independent musicians to post and sell their music. There was an article about this thing called the Queer Country Quarterly. I was super intrigued. Being a Midwestern suburban white kid, queer and country were things that absolutely did not go together for me. I knew this was a story I wanted to tell. So I got on a plane, went to New York, and I found Karen Pittleman. She fronts a band called Karen and the Sorrows, and she organizes Queer Country Quarterly and their bigger extravaganza, the Gay Ole Opry.
Sometime in 2011, I think, I thought it would be fun to have a big gay show with this other band, My Gay Banjo, and it kind of took off and became this whole big thing. That was the very first Gay Ole Opry. And I was so nervous about it because I was worried people would come ironically. Because, it's Brooklyn, which is the last thing I wanted because we love country music. But it wasn't like that at all. And 300 people showed up and people were crying and saying how they'd never had a chance to be in a space where they felt like they could be themselves and also hear the music that they loved. So it seemed like something we had to keep doing. And
has country always been a thing for you?
No, before this I was in more like a punk rock band, and I grew up with a lot of country music from my dad, who it's not like the traditional country music story. He made compilation albums sold on TV. He had a company called Heartland Music. So I grew up in New York City, but he was always going back and forth to Nashville to make commercials for these compilation albums with George Jones and the Oak Ridge Boys and Don Williams. And then he would come home and force me to listen to all that, which I rejected. I'm I don't want to listen to Don Williams, but it got in there. And then later, when my heart was feeling especially broken, suddenly I just started writing country songs. I didn't even know why. It just started coming out of me, and I couldn't fight it. And it's just been coming out of me as country songs ever since.
On her website, Karen asks, why queer country? Because sometimes you love a culture that doesn't love you back. And when everyone came to the first Gay Ole Opry in April 2011 in all of their country finery, we knew we weren't alone. We do it because we love the music and want to build a community to support queer country musicians. We do it because everybody needs a honky-tonk angel to hold them tight. We do it because we believe in country music for all cow people.
Well, I think it's often a problem if you're not in the majority. It's not like you're not absorbing the culture around you and the ways that that culture includes you or makes you welcome or objectifies you or designates you as the enemy. You don't get to pick that, but music is powerful, art is powerful. You fall in love with things even if they don't reflect your own life back to you. Though I think that at the same time that can be so deeply painful because then you love the sound, you love to hear a song, especially with a song, like they become so woven into your life, into your body, and then to look at the culture around that music and see that you're not included at best, versus, or like your life doesn't even matter to them at worst, is like a very particular kind of pain. And so that's what I really meant when I was saying, like, when you love a culture, when you love something that doesn't love you back, but you can't, it doesn't mean that you have to give it up, I don't think. And I think it can be like a call to then you need to start creating. I definitely have that like punk DIY belief deep in me, even when I don't want to, because it's kind of a drag. Like, I don't want to have to do it myself. It's a lot of work, But like, if the thing doesn't exist that you need, you should build it. It's like so much work. It's hard enough to have a band, but like I can't help it. So, I just wanted this to exist. My ex, who I started this band with, my pedal steel player, and I just wanted us to be able to play shows where it wasn't weird that she was my partner. And so I had to make them. But I think a lot about how important it is to be able to see yourself reflected back from the art you love, and that I think it's on like all of us then, if there's something in our heart that we want to make, and that music or that art calls to us, then it's on us then to get that out into the world so that everybody else who's been waiting to see their stories told back.
Well, I'm also a Midwestern kid who had a lot of stereotypes about country music.
This is Cindy Emsch.
I'm with the Secret Emchi Society, my special little queer country band of miscreants and rabble-rousers. Like, I grew up in Michigan in a rural farm town, and all the people I knew who liked country music were the people that would want to beat me up. So it didn't really feel like a place that was welcoming or a style of music that was. I'll also say it was so kind of intrinsic to Midwestern culture that like I didn't think Johnny Cash or Crystal Gayle or Willie Nelson were country musicians. I just thought that was just music. And then like, oh, there's like, your Garth Brooks, that's country, but I like the old school country people. I just thought that was like American music, and I didn't really analyze it further than that. So that always felt like it was welcoming because I didn't put that label on it. Mm-hmm. To me, what I think is really interesting about queer country is that I feel like it is a lot of people who grew up kind of with an environment or a culture where this kind of music really spoke to them more, but it didn't feel like a safe thing to be a fan of. And I mean, especially for those of us that were coming up in like the 80s and 90s, a lot of like who you made your friends with and stuff was like, what kind of music did you all like? And let's bond. Like, oh, you like Jane's Addiction. No one else has heard of them. I like them too. And you kind of found your friends that way. And so it becomes really dangerous to be like, oh, I love Willie Nelson. Oh, you want to kill me. Right. So it feels like, oh, I shouldn't be super, out about my musical preference, regardless of how out I am about everything else. And I think it's really cool that most of the queer country musicians I know actually make country music that sounds a lot more like the old-fashioned traditional stuff. And I feel like there's a lot of ways that kind of the more traditional country-sounding music can actually have much more of an activist bent to it. A lot of my songs aren't super activist, even though I'm a big progressive and like do as much as I can to like help try to change the world. But I also feel like if I just tell super like kind of honest, raw, authentically true to me songs that are in this oeuvre, but aren't like crazy. Like, I love the new Willie Nelson song, like Vote Him Out. I'm like, oh, I think I might just want to cover that and like just put that in my arsenal. But my stuff is usually more about like personal relationships and friendship songs. But I feel like telling your truth as a queer person, especially in today's America, is still a very political act. So I just kind of go where the music takes me and try not to overthink like how much it needs to have a political message, whereas just existing, it kind of is a political message.
We're here, we're queer, and we're going to play our guitar.
And this is Viva.
And I play the electric guitar, sing and write songs, and I'm here to play the Queer Country Quarterly. I grew up in Arizona, and I love country music. As a guitarist, country music is very much guitar-driven, and so, I grew up in the 70s in a Montessori experimental school, and just anything you play that has a guitar in it has some blues in it, has some country. And so I always loved country music, but of course it wasn't a place that I felt you know, and the message of a lot of commercial country, let's say, has a clear it's very subliminal, you know, that it's God, country, and, you know, marriage and military, and, you know, it's got its focuses and its themes. Of course, the great songwriters in country have always been truth tellers. I mean, you have Johnny Cash, you have Men in Black, which is a song, once you hear it, you know, every time I start to play Men in Black, I'll start to cry, you know, and you think of his journey. And you've got Dolly Parton, and of course, you know, Nathan Carrera is doing a show doing all Dolly Parton songs that are like from her early stuff, where there's not a single heterosexual marriage or childbirth that happens with a happy ending. And so it's interesting because she's dealing with the tragic female heroine sort of in a traditional way, but it ends up being this cautionary tale that has a message to it, which is don't get married, don't have children. And it's very subversive, you know. So Dolly especially had to be, I think, you know, extra subversive, whereas Johnny got to be, you know, Johnny got to come out and flip people off. If Dolly had done that, you know, she'd have been in hot water. But she was obviously very talented for being that kind of subversive. But yeah, when I saw the Gay Ole Opry, I just cried because it was a music I loved that it never occurred to me to go into, you know, as a songwriter or guitarist. I came to New York to do my career, and so it's obviously New York is not a country music mecca. It's a music mecca, though, so there's a lot of all kinds of music happening here. But it's not like I went to Nashville to make my career. But so because I came to New York, I got involved in experimental music, and I got involved in like Brazilian experimental music, and there's a lot of Latin music here, and it's a very rich scene. But when I saw the Opry, it just touched my heart in a way, because I grew up in Arizona, and country music has a reputation as being America's music, which is arguable, but it's part of America's music, certainly. And so the fact that we're not included in that is a problem.
Some of the most legendary and beloved songs in our history are about unrequited love. And this isn't unique to country by any means, but I feel like it might be especially true about country. There's a sort of irony there about a musician's unrequited love for a music and a culture that doesn't love them back. There's something radical about that. Maybe even something beautiful.
It's doubly queer because it's queer, so you're singing of certain kinds of love. You're singing of, you know, homosexual love, but you're also singing failed and impossible love. And we as queers have a history of their, you know, failed and impossible love. That's part of our legacy.
And frankly, friends, I have a confession to make. A big part of the reason I wanted to do this story in the first place was because of a very visceral reaction to the concept of queer country. Like, I read that Bandcamp article and thought, holy shit, queer and country, those are not things that go together. That's so weird. So I bought the plane ticket to New York and showed up at this place called the Branded Saloon in Brooklyn. I met up with Karen, we started talking, and I started to rethink what the story was really about. I'm this Midwestern suburban white kid who grew up in a bubble with a very specific idea of what country is, who listens to it, and what the culture probably thinks about me and people like me. And I keep thinking back to this episode of the show that we did called Invisible Histories. And in that episode, the guy that I was talking to, Josh, talked about this idea that queer people just don't live in the South, or that if they do, they should just leave, that the equation's just that simple. People actually think that. And that's wrong, right? We know queer people exist in the South. We know those folks deserve love and support and validation just like any other queer and trans folks do. It's a not so subtle form of victim blaming to dismiss those folks and say, well, what do they expect? They live in the South. And it hit me while Karen and I were talking that my initial interest in this concept of queer country was basically the same attitude playing out in my view of country music. It was an important lesson in the fact that we all have biases to unlearn, and sometimes they're lurking around in places we don't expect or think about.
Well, I think also it's easy to forget that sometimes things get positioned like that for very specific political reasons. You know, like, why is it useful to say that there aren't queer people in the South when that's like patently untrue, right? Like, well, there's certainly political advantages, especially for like, you know, conservative ideologies to make it sound like that, like, and to erase people's lives, even while they're right there living them. And like, obviously, if 10% of the population is queer, right, like, that means 10% of people everywhere who are listening to country music are queers. Like, it's just a fact that people are gonna love that. music because it's just music. Like, people love all kinds of music, and there's no reason why we shouldn't also make it and create spaces that, like, that's what I'm obsessed with, like how to create spaces that are welcoming for everybody, not just queers, and how do we work with and tell the truth about the ways that country music has been positioned politically for these conservative values. Who does it benefit to position country in this way, and what does it mean for us to unpack that, and not to have this like romanticized version of diversity, I think, or a romanticized version of how like we're all just gonna, be making it together. Like, I want to ask those hard questions. I want to understand the role country music does play, like especially in America's politics, because it's deep. Mm-hmm. And also, like, I want to be able to like make music and have people come and dance with their sweeties, whoever their sweeties are.
And therein lies a struggle that I think many artists face, especially in music. You want to make beautiful art. You want to make it mean something to someone. You want people to laugh or cry, but so many of us also want to change the world. Are you an artist or an activist? And of course, that's a false dichotomy. You can be both, but also sometimes we don't really have a choice. Like Cindy said earlier, just existing and telling your truth as a queer or trans person is a pretty political act in and of itself, whether we want it to be or not.
It's not like anybody is ever going to listen to my records and just be like, musician Karen Piddleman, always going to be a woman. I'm always going to be queer. I'm always going to be like a Jew from New York City, whatever. Like those, but that's fine. That's who I am. And like, I do want people to listen to my music just as music. Also, that doesn't exist. There is no, like, I don't believe there's some neutral musician identity. It's just, if you're a straight white cis man, then that's neutral. It's
right.
Not neutral. So like, if those are the terms already, like if we are going to be read by our identities, whether or not we want to, then at least let's like have some say over how we're read and be able to like share our values around it. Because I do think that's part of the way you experience art, like especially when you really love a musician or an artist or an actor. Like, you want to know what their politics are. You want to imagine that they could be your friend. And it's just a fucking drag when you discover that, like, actually, if they met you, they would hate you. They don't care about you at all. Like, they would, like, let you die, like, because that song is still in you, or that movie or that art is still in you, and then that's like it just like breaks your heart a little bit or a lot. And certainly like that happens a lot in country music. Like, I was looking for some examples of people singing country music at Trump rallies, and I came on Trace Adkins performing at one, and I love Trace Adkins. I really love I Left Something Turned On at Home. It's my favorite dirty country song. And I was so sad. I was like, Trace Adkins, why are you performing at this rally? But turns out that he's very conservative and he's friends with Trump, and it's just like, okay, like, then also like we all need to get out there and say what we believe, so at least it's not weighted so heavily the way it is in country music. Like, whereas, in other genres, like for every like Ted Nugent, there's a Bruce Springsteen or something, like,
right.
There's like the worst assholes, but there's also some people who can restore your faith that like, so, and there are people with, progressive or at least liberal values in country music, and there always have been. It's just like that part of the story isn't told. Instead, there's this idea of it being this monolithic conservative bastion.
And I feel like this has a lot to do with what we as a society and as individuals decide is worthy of our attention. Country singer Casey Musgraves released a song in 2013 called Follow Your Arrow, and she sings, "Make lots of noise, kiss lots of boys, or kiss lots of girls if that's something you're into." This song came out in 2013 to major commercial success. It caused controversy because of course it did, but the Country Music Awards also named it their Song of the Year. All that completely missed me. Mainstream country star Shelley Wright came out as gay 3 years earlier in 2010, and in 2016 she released an album that debuted at number 13 on the Billboard country charts. All of these cultural touchstones completely missed me, and maybe it's just because I'm an emo kid at heart and I don't really think of myself as much of a country fan, but maybe that's also because I'd written country off completely and decided that world wasn't worthy of my attention anymore. Maybe it's both. It's hard to know. Karen was telling me about this book by an author, Nadine Hubbs, called Rednecks, Queers, and Country Music.
She talks a lot about how, like, the way, like, you present what music you like and how that's related to your class background is kind of fascinating. And because if you say you like country, it's looked at, for the same, like, stereotypes I was talking about before. Like, it's like a marker of being working class or poor.
Yeah.
And so for, like, especially for middle class people, like, there's this way of being like, oh, I like everything except country.
Yep.
Which sometimes it becomes, I like everything except rap. Like, the other ones that get included is rap and metal. Mm-hmm. And similarly, right? Like, those are about class, like about race too, for sure, with rap, but also very much like about class. Mm-hmm. And I think there's this idea of, like, what refinement means, like, you like all kinds of music. Except
right, like I would never lower myself to country or rap, but and
I don't think that when people are saying that, they know that that's why they're saying that, but I think that there's you pick up these messages like, oh, well, this music isn't one that, like, you need to listen to, but there is country in all kinds of other, like blues and country are all intertwined, mm-hmm. rock and country, soul, like, and then there's, like, what is now called Americana. Like, genre isn't as rigorous as the way it's policed. So you may not have been listening to country, but country is all around you.
And all this, of course, is not to excuse or explain away all of the very real problems that exist in this world. I think the problem here is that many of us would simply like to believe that whatever culture we see as the other is somehow worse than whatever space we inhabit. Putting emphasis on another group's problems makes it easier to see our own as somehow less bad. Most of us will happily pay lip service to explaining the problems in our own movements and cliques and in-groups, and even the ways we ourselves might be upholding these systems. But we also just know that right around the corner, in this case where all the rednecks are, well, that's just a special kind of awful. You'll find links to music from Karen and the Sorrows, Secret MC Society, and Viva in the show notes. It's good stuff. I enjoyed getting to know their music through the course of making this episode. I'm always on the lookout for cool music made by queer and trans folks, so if you have any to suggest, I'd love to hear from you. If the musicians have cool enough stories to tell, I might even ask them to tell their story for the show. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Callie Gets It. Show is on Twitter at The Gaytheist. You can shoot me an email at podcast@thegaytheistmanifesto.com. If you enjoy shows like this one where I'm able to get out into the field, get up close and personal with my subjects, please check out patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto and consider a pledge to support the show. There's simply no way I'd be able to do this without the wonderful folks who give there. Before I go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is The Gaytheist Manifesto.